Welcome to Series 2 of the J.John and Tom Wright podcast. Hello, Tom.
Hello, John. Good to be with you again.
And you too. I love having these conversations with you, Tom, in this cozy study surrounded by thousands of books.
It's a happy place for me. I mean, these are old friends, and I just sense a world of learning and of biblical devotion, which is all kind of oozing out of the walls at me.
It certainly does. Tom, I love Christmas.
Oh.
I love Christmas. I can't wait to put the decorations up. And
you can come and do ours if you like.
And I love the whole season. And I love us to talk about Christmas, the Christmas story, and everything to do with that. Okay, first question, Tom. December the 25th. How did we arrive at that date for the birth of Jesus?
The birth of Jesus is not given a date in the New Testament. And as far as I know, nobody in the first 2 centuries of Christianity tries to date it. And so I think, this is not my field at all, but I think that somewhere between the 3rd and 4th century, the church, in order to make it possible to have a kind of a sequence of devotional moments retelling the story, they fastened on this date, probably because it coincided with a winter festival they already had. I mean, it's an interesting thing. People sometimes say, oh, this was just a midwinter pagan festival that the Christians jumped on. But, you know, the earliest Christians, they routinely built churches on top of pagan temples. And some people might say, oh, isn't that dangerous? And the answer is no. The pagan temple was a way of acknowledging something. And this is to say Jesus is Lord and Caesar isn't, and Pan isn't, and Bacchus isn't, and none of these gods are. Rather than letting them keep the space and then doing our own thing somewhere else, actually to say, no, here is the reality towards which these vague signs that humans have been aware of this way and that were actually pointing. So it doesn't bother me that it was a midwinter festival, which then was picked up by the Christians. So I think the specific day of December the 25th, to be honest, I have no idea who came up with that. And in any case, the calendar has shifted over the years and done different things, and months added and 10 days taken away and so on. So that from one point of view, it's arbitrary. It's like putting the clocks back or forward or whatever.
Yes.
You know, we are where we are now.
So the date isn't actually important.
Correct.
But we know that Jesus was born.
We know that Jesus was born.
And that's what's important.
Yeah. You know, when sometimes people say we need to see a birth certificate, I say, well, isn't it enough that I'm here? You know, the old line of which came first, the chicken and the egg. I have a cartoon somewhere where the chicken is saying to the egg, well, let's not argue about it. We're both here now.
That's right.
And so in a sense, the birth of Jesus is important, but it's not as important as some other things, in that you get it at the beginning of Matthew, you get it at the beginning of Luke. John hints at it but doesn't tell you. Mark doesn't mention it at all. Paul has one line where he says Jesus was born of a woman, born under the law. Well, of course he was born of a woman. I mean, that's how you get born. And so it's not load-bearing for a lot of the other things in the New Testament. But of course it matters because Jesus is Jesus. And so the idea of God coming to live in our midst is always going to be earth-shattering, whatever date we give it.
Whatever date we give it. Now, different Christians practice different things. Some practice Lent. Some find Advent, the season of Advent, very helpful. Yeah. I do. Mm-hmm. What does the word Advent mean?
The word Advent means arrival or coming. And Advent actually is a double season. If you think of the church's year as a circle, then Advent is the point where the beginning and the end overlap, because in Advent we're doing 2 things, certainly in the tradition which you and I share, the Anglican tradition. There are 2 different things. And I sometimes think a lot of worshippers, as they sing Advent hymns, they don't realize these two things are going on. One is the arrival of Jesus, and proclaimed by John the Baptist, the voice crying in the wilderness, and here we are, prepare the way of the Lord. So that's one Advent theme. But then the other Advent theme is Jesus' second coming. This Jesus whom you've seen go into heaven will come in the same way. And all the great New Testament teaching about the fact that he will come again. And so when we celebrate Advent, we are preparing for Christmas, and that's how it works out. But it's also preparing for the whole ministry of Jesus. But at the same time, it's the end of the previous church year, as it were. So it's the beginning of one church year and the end of when you get round the loop to the end of that year, we're looking ahead to the final coming of Jesus. And it's very interesting to see how the arrival of Jesus and his heralding by John the Baptist, etc., points us forward to the day when he will come again with glory to judge the living and the dead.
You personally, Tom, how do you keep the cycle of Advent? It's, it commences December the 1st.
Usually it's the Sunday closest to December the 1st. December the 1st happens to be my birthday, so I always enjoy it when that's on a Sunday, because it's always Advent Sunday. I get a little frustrated because in our culture now, Advent is when the shops and the radio stations start playing Christmas carols. Now, I was brought up that you do that in Christmas time, and that you really hold back until Christmas, and then you have a long season from Christmas through to February the 2nd, which is the feast of Jesus being presented in the temple, according to Luke 2. That's the Christmas season when we should be singing the Christmas carols. But no, we've moved them back. So it gets a bit messy in popular culture. And I get irritated if I'm out and about doing Christmas shopping to hear the Christmas carols in a tinny version again and again and again, because really Advent ought to be about waiting and hoping, not celebrating already something which actually we are waiting for. So the way I've tried to do it is through regular church services, traditional church services, which are about Advent, which are about the hope which is there in the Old Testament, the expectation of a coming king. What would that look like? Who would it be? How would it happen? Etc., etc. Because in a sense, that's more real to who we are now. We're not quite sure how Jesus is going to come again, what that will mean, when it will be, but we are searching the scriptures, trying to remain faithful, like old Simeon and Anna in the temple in Luke 2, waiting and looking for what God is going to do, even if it comes in ways which surprise us.
Well, Jesus did come.
Yes.
We talk about the incarnation.
Yeah.
What does the word incarnation actually mean? It's
a Latin word with the carne bit in the middle, as with the word for meat now in Italian. It means flesh. The word becoming flesh. The idea of God's self-communication turning into a human being, which is the most extraordinary thing. And yet, it both is and isn't, because there are hints and guesses at it in the Old Testament already. To us a child is born, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Hang on, who are we talking about? And Isaiah chapter 9 says, well, that's what I hear the Spirit saying. Let's live with it and work it out. But you see this particularly in John's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 1 to 18, which is called the prologue to John's Gospel, where you have, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, which is a way of saying that the way God created the world was by speaking, and stuff happened. He spake and it was done. He commanded and it came forward. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth, says the psalmist. And if you think of a word as a vocalized breath, this is God saying something out into the void, and stuff happens. Now, supposing that vocalized breath turns into a person, what would that look like? And the answer is the Word became flesh and lived in our midst. And the word for lived in verse 14 there is tabernacled. He pitched his tent in our midst, which takes us back to Exodus chapter 40, when Moses and Aaron make the tabernacle in the wilderness, and the living God, the glorious living God, comes and his presence rests within the tabernacle. That's that sense of Jesus coming to be one of us, coming to be with us. So that's basically what incarnation is all about. And of course, for many philosophers, it makes no sense at all, because God ought to be beyond and unknowable and distant, etc., etc. Well, in the Christian tradition, of course, God is greater than all our possible imaginings. But as with Solomon's prayer about the temple, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you, how much less this house. Nevertheless, you've promised to put your name here. And exactly the same way, the Word is from all eternity. Nevertheless, he comes and dwells with us. That's what incarnation is all about.
So Jesus always existed. In the beginning was the Word.
The Word, yes. I would say the one who became Jesus. Jesus is the human name. Part of the mystery here is that until his conception and birth, he is, in technical language, the second person of the Trinity, but
yes,
not yet human.
But not yet human. But he chooses to become human.
Exactly.
And I mean, our little human minds, Tom, we're trying to figure it out. But of course, we can't fully fathom and understand God. Yeah. How did he do that? How did God shrink himself?
That's a great question, but again and again, people who have studied not only the Bible but the early church teachers have come back and said that's precisely what you have. Infinity dwindled to infancy is the title of a book by a friend of mine, now sadly no longer with us. But that idea seems to be all the time in the Bible. And when you say, how did he do it? One of the keys here, which is often forgotten, is that in Genesis 1, God makes humans in his own image and tells them to look after the garden. That's their commission. They're to bring God's wise, fruitful presence into the creation. And they are, and this gradually comes out, they're supposed to reflect the praises of creation back to the Creator. This is what in later language is called the royal priesthood. God makes humans so that when he wants to come and enter his own creation, there will be an appropriate form, a vessel, a vehicle, where he can do that. In other words, it's not as though God were to become a whale or a waterfall or a hedgehog or something. God makes humans so that there will be, in his own image, so that there will be an appropriateness when he himself comes as the royal priest, as the truly human one. And the New Testament picks up on that. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, says Paul in Colossians 1. So it's a two-way street. The more we understand about what it means to be human, the more we can see mysteriously still what it might mean for God always to want to do this. But also the more we look hard at Jesus and think of him as the truly human being, which is how he comes across in the New Testament, the more we then understand backwards, as it were, about what it means for us to be human. So we learn in both directions.
So did God become human and then enter Mary's womb?
I think that's one of those questions which is unanswerable, because the entering Mary's womb, I think, is, conception is a mystery anyway, but when it's the conception of somebody without a human father, it's even more mysterious. So I want to say God becoming human in Mary's womb. I don't want to put a chronology on that.
Yes. Now, why did God have to be God and human?
Why did God have to be God and human? Questions about why did God X, Y, or Z can be tricky, because that implies that we can stand back behind God and see the mind of God, and of course he had to do it like this, whereas so often the stuff that God does is a surprise. It's a shock. And we are not in a position to answer back and say, now, okay, God, I see what you were up to, as though we were superior looking down on God and his purposes. We're never in that position. So I start from what is quite clearly the case in the Gospels and in Paul and in Hebrews and so on, that this Jesus, who was undoubtedly a full-on human being, flesh and blood, and a cheerful, interesting, quizzical, scary, highly sensitive, intelligent human being, that actually the disciples are realizing something more is going on here, and they don't really have good language for it. And then very quickly they come to say, we have been hosting God in our midst. Why did that have to be? Because the way that God, the Creator, made the world was in order that he could come and be appropriately part of his own creation. This is this great theme which I've been exploring in my recent work of God's Homecoming, that God wanted from the beginning to make a world in which he could come and be at home with his creatures. So much Christian tradition has imagined that the point of it all is that we're given a kind of exam, and if we pass the exam, then we can leave here and we can go and be at home with God somewhere else. That's Platonism. That's not Christianity. Christianity is about God making a world where it will be appropriate for him to come and be at home with us. As in Genesis 1 and 2, they hear the voice of the Lord walking in the garden, and Adam and Eve are with God in the garden. There's a companionship. It's a mysterious companionship, but that's how God wanted it to be. That's how it will be again. And the end of the book of Revelation, God himself will be with them and wipe away all tears from all eyes. So that sense of this is how God always wanted it, and so he made humans in such a way that it would be appropriate, we could almost say natural, for him to become human, to be a human among humans, to be with us.
And of course, he became the perfect mediator.
Well, yes, I mean, the word mediator has done various jobs in bits of the Bible and in Christian theology, but yes, he stands in the middle, because humans are called, this is part of being in the image of God, humans are called to stand at the dangerous intersection of heaven and earth. That's actually a temple image, that when you went to a temple in the ancient world, heaven and earth are coming together there. And so it's a bit scary. We're not quite sure how to cope with this, which is why you do all the stuff that you do. And Jesus is the ultimate human being who stands at and embodies the intersection of heaven and earth. Paul says in Ephesians 1, God's plan from the beginning was to sum up in the Messiah everything in heaven and on earth. That we use language like divinity and humanity. Those are just abstract nouns. I prefer to talk about everything in heaven and on earth coming to be summed up in this one human being who is the intersection point, and hence mediator, yes, because he communicates heaven to earth and earth to heaven, and takes upon himself all the entail of that, in that when earth goes horribly wrong, he is the one who, standing in the midst, or feel a preaching point here coming over me, hanging in the midst on the cross, is joining heaven and earth together. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, Tom, when do you think Jesus knew that he was God?
It depends what you mean by knew that he was God. I think from very early on, and you can see this in that lovely story in Luke chapter 2, when he's in the temple talking to the teachers and asking them questions, and they're all amazed at him. I think he is reading his scriptures from an early age and praying the scriptures from an early age, and seeing in those scriptures the promise of Israel's God to come back in person to rescue and redeem his people. And I think as the boy Jesus is praying and reading and thinking about that, he is the whole time finding it as a vocation. This is who I uniquely am. Now, you see, if I say, did he know he was God? very easy to have a Western picture of God,
Yeah.
this omnipotent being with a long beard sitting up on a cloud somewhere. Did Jesus know he was that? No. Jesus knew and believed from an early age that what's the stories that Scripture was telling about the coming of God to be with his people, I think he could sense those coming true in his own person, and was then exploring, so what's this going to mean? What am I going to have to do? What am I called to do? And that's when those wonderful passages in the Psalms and Isaiah and so on all come through, and you can see in Jesus' mature teaching these vocational strands bubbling through. This is what God came to do. Isaiah 53 says, who would have thought that he was the arm of the Lord? And the picture of the arm of the Lord, the powerful arm coming to rescue his people,
Yes.
which transforms into the one who is despised and rejected and who was wounded for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities. And I think Jesus is intuiting all of that from an early age, exploring vocationally, which all the way to Gethsemane, actually, because in Gethsemane he prayed, is there another way? Did I get this wrong? Did I misread the signals? But I think it starts way back with that scriptural, prayerful exploration of this is who God said he is and who he's going to be and what he's going to do. And I think Jesus could sense that that was constituting his own personal one-off vocation.
Do you know, I just love sitting here with you, Tom, asking a world-renowned theologian, I think, the questions that most of us actually think, but we never get an opportunity to ask them. So, Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there's a lot more questions coming.
Good.